Hello, and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And we're joined today by Ben Cobley. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Hilary. Hello, Sebastian.
So Ben is the author of The Tribe, a book which people might have read already. But his new book, The Progress Trap, is out at the end of this month. And SDP members, I'm sure all of whom read their newsletter very carefully, will know that they have a discount code where they can pre-order that book already. So that's a great benefit for SDP members that we have.
And I think with 40% off.
40% off. So
that's the attraction.
Absolutely, yes.
Except for the book itself, of course.
Yes.
That should be the main attraction, shouldn't it?
Well, I hope it is. Yeah.
Do you have a copy to hand, by the way?
I don't have hard copies
Okay.
at the moment. They haven't come through yet.
That's okay. I thought it might be nice to flash it up, but
I thought that'd be nice too, but I can't.
No, it's okay. We can put a photo of it up.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that'd be good.
Superimpose it.
Absolutely. So you very kindly gave us a bit of an advanced preview of it, Ben, and thanks for that. So I guess my take on it, this is very, very high level, is that you kind of situate everything in this kind of weird mix where we have panic on the streets of London versus keep calm and carry on. And it kind of feels like you're saying that the reason why the carry-onness happens is because of a kind of hubristic belief of the progressives in themselves. Is that a reasonable analysis of your arguments?
What do you mean, first of all, by keep calm and carry on?
So that, we just carry on with a kind of consumerist, keep buying stuff, keep doing stuff, keep making GDP go up, and maybe it'll all come right in the end.
Well, that's certainly not my argument, my positive argument in the book. But I'd say that's certainly one element of our situation. It's one element of what I'd say is the progressive society. That's the liberal consumer society. And then the other side, I mean, simplifying massively, the other side is the revolutionary, sort of overturning the whole basis of previous society. And to an extent, those two, they do go in tandem in certain ways, because the consumer society picks up fashions from the revolutionary progressive identity politics sort of complex. So I think there's very much a sort of a two-track sort of progressive, if you like, progressive progress of our society at the moment. But I would say certainly this is the title of the second part of the book is the progressive society. And the first part is how progressives win. And basically one of the main arguments in the book is really that progressives are completely dominant in society, and how do we conceptualize it, understand it, and then also how do we respond?
And you're using this term progressives. Is that a kind of replacement for the left?
No.
Okay.
It can be interchangeable. That's really a main sort of reason for getting into the book and writing it, was a fascination of what really being progressive meant, because it means so many things to so many different people. And I think that's one element of its strength. We can project our desires onto it. At a very basic level, progress means improvement. It means things getting better. And who can not want that? So in a very basic understanding of it, people use progressive just to mean, stuff that they like. But then on the other hand, you have, as it were, the heavy duty left progressives, who have a whole ideology based around this, you could say, this idea of progress, but it's very much attached to them and their power increasing. So often by signing up, I mean, this is, probably the main argument of the book, The Trap, is by signing up to this idea of progress that they have, and therefore their form of what being a progressive means, you're actually signing up to domination by a certain group of people who obviously have their own interests. I mean, they have their theories, but for them, their theories of improvement in society are linked exactly to them having more and more power over the rest of us. So that's the main dynamic, really, that I'm identifying in the book.
You say that at the end of the introduction, if I can quote the book, you say, if you are the guardian of progress and all that is true and right, then all that remains is the need to attain and maintain power. All is technique, all is power. This is the progress trap. So that really had symmetry for me with a lot of the progressive movements, or a lot of the, I suppose it's the current thing. We have the next thing is, it can be, any sort of social issue that people sort of latch on to, and they change their profile pictures and so on. And for me, a lot of the progressive conversation these past few years has seemed like it's a game of power. It's like, if you sign up to 9 out of the 10 things, that's not good enough.
Yep.
You have to sign up to all 10. I wonder, is that sort of what gave you the sorry, there's a lot of building work going on here, so you might hear some noises every now and again. But do you see similarities with that? This idea that you have to believe everything that a lot of the progressives believe, otherwise you're not part of their club. Is that part of the power games?
I think it's a movable feast, really. I mean, in terms of the progressive, is someone, as I see it, in this kind of closed, as it were, mostly left progressive form. It's really whatever you are at the moment, whatever you're focusing on at the moment, since you are sort of blessed in a certain way. There's a religious aspect to it, which I address in a chapter called "Taking the Place of God," and that vests basically authority in the person. While before, it might be God is on our side and God will judge at the last. Now it's history will judge. You'll hear this a lot nowadays from progressives, or people say historians will say, future history will say, and it's always what they think now. So it's really, what I'm talking about is a game of authority. It's almost like it's seductive for ourselves and to others to have this sort of great authority that we understand things, we understand it all, we understand history and the future, and therefore whatever we're focusing on at the moment must be blessed in some sort of way because it's us, and we are on the right side of history. So, like I say, it can be a movable feast. It's not so much like, a progressive will write a list of 10 things. Well, maybe a few crazy, very consistent ones might, but most of them, they just sort of operate on a general, whatever is going on at the moment, whatever I'm focusing on, whatever my opinion is the right one. And if you're against it, then you're by definition wrong, and need to be marginalized in society, even I think removed from society in some sort of way. And this goes through the history of like I say, the left wing form of progress, especially through communism, especially, but also forms of fascism were very progressive.
Well, can you explain the link you draw between the colonizers and the decolonizers? Because I find that fascinating. I haven't ever heard that before.
Oh, well, that's the lengthy argument of the introductory chapter. So chapter 1 is going through a history from, it starts off with the colonial period and how, basically Western colonialism was a progressive movement. Imperialism, it was about in bringing civilization, commerce, there were the three C's, and I forget the other one, of course. But of course as well,
Christianity.
removing the
joke?
slave. Huh?
Were you joking if you've forgotten the other one?
Is it
Christianity,
Christianity?
right?
He says, yeah.
That's the thing. You
Yeah.
always. I mean, it's a funny thing with writing books. You forget what's in your book.
Well, I read it
do.
last night, so it's probably fresher in my mind.
Yeah, no, you might know better than I do.
Commerce,
but
Christianity,
yeah,
and civilization.
Christianity, that
Yeah.
was it. Yeah, no, of course. So they had there was a well-meaning aspect to it. We want to bring these things to the world. But of course, to bring those things to the world, you needed to beat up a lot of people. And to beat up a lot of people, you need good weapons, and a lot of people suffer as a result. I mean, whether it was in historical terms a good or a bad thing is, it's happened already. But it was, like I say, very much a progressive sort of ideological movement, and then whatever happened on the ground afterwards. And I see decolonization in a similar type of way, although I think it's a lot more cynical and a lot more self-interested, really. But it's based on, in very universal ideas, of goodness and truth, and ending oppression. And like I say, going back to the colonial period, the imperialists, they were looking to end oppression too, or at least they said they were. Through the slave trade, bringing Christianity, so getting rid of old superstitious beliefs. So they have quite a lot in common in that sense, and I think it's worth adding that decolonization comes to us nowadays is very much like the revenge of the colonized, the revenge of maybe the global south, or the global majority we hear. So, generally non-white people, non-Europeans. But it's actually coming out of the Western intellectual ideological tradition. Very much so, just basically following it. So it's part of a continuing story of really progressive ideology, I think.
So you're kind of drawing a link between colonization and decolonization as being different sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah, very much so. I think decolonization is part of what is existentially, a colonization project for the West. Basically they're trying to take over the institutions, get rid of old texts, bring in their own texts. This is a revolutionary taking over of society, and it's working to a large extent.
And it's kind of justified on a kind of white man's burden kind of idea, as well as in the same way that colonization was.
Yeah, I guess there is a bit of that involved. I mean, I think decolonization, as I've seen it, is predominantly a non-white academic thing. I mean, obviously you do get white people in there, and with the theory of it, it does potentially give a role to white people, as basically the guilty ones who need to atone for their guilt.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these ideas are actually quite difficult to argue against, because they're not arguments that can be countered with rational, scientific, evidence-based arguments, because it's so much of a kind of belief thing.
Well, I think they can, but it's just so exhausting.
Yeah.
And they're all, I think one of the main points is, and this was a point of my previous book as well, of course, is that they're just so active, and they've got their, it's a form of politics. It's like you could say philosophically, in truth terms, evidence terms, it's nonsense. But in a political sense, that really doesn't matter so much if you've just got power, and we'll come to talk of power a bit later in another thing we're going to discuss. If you've got sort of an integrated ideology, which everyone is familiar with, which is very simple, which people can tap into, and is, is very easy implement, it kind of can spread like wildfire. And anyone who is trying to oppose it with, as it were, facts and evidence and rational arguments is just struggling behind, at all times. So I think often in these things, argument against, the literal arguments they're making doesn't always work, and something else is often more effective.
Is there a chance that if you're arguing against progressivism, or certainly the people that call themselves progressives, you might be accused of being a regressive and wanting to go back to the past because the past was a better place?
Yeah, that's always what they say. Yeah, you're backward. Yeah, you're nostalgic, looking to go back to the past. That's just a standard argument they use. Yes.
And there is a chance of that. There is what do you call that? Maybe a regressive trap. Of thinking that everything was better in the past and wanting to turn the clock
definitely.
back.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I address in the final chapter when I'm, talking about how we should respond, to progressivism and one way that people do is just but by giving up or just being reflexively negative about everything that's going on. And it's sometimes quite strangely comforting to do that, isn't it? But obviously politically it's a complete dead end and will not achieve anything. But I mean, come to think of it, as I was saying that, I was thinking of someone like Peter Hitchens, who's very articulate, but has basically sort of given up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's very articulate, explaining why it's, as it were, rational to have given up because there's no hope. But I mean, I don't see things that way at all. We have to try and we have to work. But one of the interesting aspects, I think, of the politics is of progressivism and an argument against, basically in favor of progressivism, is it gives us confidence and hope. That we know actually eventually we're going to win. It's one of the most basic examples of a progressive story is the happy ending, of course.
Yeah.
Just in film and drama and in a book is just the idea it will work out in the end, the bad guys will lose. And in a sense that does give us comfort and hope, but I would say it's quite naive and complacent a lot of the time, and it's also, I think it's just a habit we fall into, and it can prevent us from actually acting to change things politically.
I think one of the things that we experience, people, as a reaction that people have to the things that you're describing is a kind of reflex response, which you might characterise the reform sweeping away in the recent elections as, where people know what they don't want, but they don't know what they do want. And certainly, when we were campaigning in Runcorn, people were saying, they were voting reform because it was not the old, but they weren't expressing a really positive belief in what reform stood for. So is the other danger not just that people are kind of just lashing out as a kind of, that's not what I want, without any ability to have a positive belief in the future?
Yes, of course. And I think it's a, obviously there's a vacuum of, I don't know if you could call it belief, certainly confidence, and certainly I'd say more like a way of being, a way of addressing the world, and also a way of coming together. As a society, of course, we've fractured greatly. So I think, a new form of politics, an improvement, as it were, will involve more forms of collective being, of actually coming together. And I see Reformer trying to do a bit of that with social clubs, but it takes me back to the early Labour Party, of course, which came out of the trade union and cooperative movement. So it came out of a lot of people being together and finding solidarity in being together and actually talking. I mean, I'm sure for you being out on the stump in Runcorn and other places. I mean, I think you basically just addressed it there. Is that people are looking for something. They're looking for something to grab hold of, and for people to trust as well. But actually, at the moment, there's very little sort of coming together, and I think you need people to be talking about politics, being together, meeting regularly, and also just forming the language on what makes sense to them, what they want. I think we are really lacking that, and but to be fair, it probably does take time, and I think there are changes obviously happening. I mean, I talk about sometimes, and in the book, the Rebel Alliance, as I call it.
Yes, I like that, the Rebel Alliance. It's a bit like the Northern Alliance, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the Rebel Alliance, I've got some issues with, but it's sort of an inchoate movement that comes and goes, forms for some things, and then goes away, others. And I think it does take time for people to develop the language to describe their feelings and what they think is important, and then look to do something together. And it's really a collective consciousness we're talking about, rather than, if you like, the contrast is the individual consumer consciousness, which is, oh, what do I want right now? And I want it right now. And politics, organized politics, is not like that, and it can't be like that.
Yeah, so a lot of progressive, or people that would call themselves progressives, are wanting, or perhaps they have good intentions. They want to see a reduction of poverty. They want to see greater equality. Is there, and I haven't read the conclusion of your book, so I don't know if you've got some solutions for this, but is there a way of bridging the gap to these people and finding unifying causes?
Could you just repeat that? Who were you talking about again?
People
just
that would call themselves progressives. Yeah, I think friends of mine.
People that would call themselves progressives. Well, I think, I mean, I see, the progressive way of being, in a way, it's in the existential air we breathe, basically. As I talked about earlier, in terms of the happy ending, the idea that the bad guys will lose. So in a sense, we're all progressive. We all fall into those sort of ways of thinking about the world, and also, things like saying, for example, history will judge. Historians will say what I say now. So many of us, we just naturally fall into that way of thinking. So I think when we're talking about addressing progressives, in a sense, we're talking about addressing anyone and everyone. So, yes, you do need to address that, and sort of lecturing people on how it's bad to be a progressive, I think, is not the way forward. I mean, it's something interesting to talk about and to tease out, but it's not. I don't think it's something to really hammer people over the head with, and of course find common ground. And I think. Actually, one thing, forgive me, that I just remember that I did talk about in the book, in that final chapter, which is almost, I think, a template for how, as it were, a sort of anti-progressive politics might work, is actually the revolt against gender self-ID, which brought together, you could say, small c conservatives, who actually believe in, basic sex and women and men, and the fact that there may be different roles between the two of them, and then I think the second generation feminists, the gender critical feminists, and that was a remarkable coalition that formed. And I think without those feminists, the thing wouldn't have got anywhere. because they just have that punch, that campaigning zeal, that habit of fighting actually and getting somewhere, and also, of course, the access to a lot. I mean, the fact that most of our institutions now, I would say, are progressive in one sense or another. They're used to being in those environments, and actually to get anywhere politically, you do need to try and penetrate those environments and actually change people's minds. So, alongside the basic politics that you're fighting, there's always a place for just steady, good arguments, and having trust in yourself that you're, I was going to say on the right side of history, but you've just got basic, sensible, as it were, rational, factual ideas.
So if you were to kind of draw from that any lessons that you might want to suggest that the SDP takes from your analysis in terms of what we're doing on the ground, it sounds like what you're suggesting is that maybe some of the things that we're already doing, which are kind of trying to build from the bottom up, are helpful. Is there any other lessons you think we should take?
Well, I don't think I should be lecturing anyone on how to build a political party.
Okay.
I mean, all of us, we have our own ideas, don't we? I think, you've got to trust in yourselves to an extent and persevere. But I mean, one thing that may or may not be useful, I think, is to conceptualize what you're doing as politics rather than philosophy and thought. Being right is fine, but it's very different to winning. And it goes back to, I think there's a distinction, there is a distinction in actual philosophy between pure knowledge and practical knowledge, or you could say pure reason, and then practical reasoning. And what a political party is engaged in is practical reasoning, or at least that's what will help you to succeed. It's basically what works. And as always, there's a continual tension there between the being right and concentrating on getting your policies right and saying the right thing, and actually just sort of engaging in the game of power and institutions, how much you compromise, all that type of thing. I haven't got any answer to that type of stuff, but that's the game you're playing in. That's the level in which you're engaging. And like I say, I'll go back to that core point. Being right is nice, but it doesn't actually matter if you're not getting anywhere with it.
Yeah, that sounds like very sound advice to me.
Yeah.
Super. Well, that's really helpful, Ben. Thank you so much for taking us through that. Just to remind SDP members that you can get your discount from your newsletter last week. And I'm really looking forward to sitting down with a book, a proper copy of the book. Ben, I'm sorry, I'm still a paper copies of books person.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, get a proper tome in your hands.
Exactly. Perhaps we can let you have a little rest, Ben, while I start off on Culture Club. So,
sure,
I brought a book to Culture Club. So, don't you, Sebastian, that I generally go to the Edinburgh Festival every year, to the Fringe Festival, and when you're in one of those situations, you sometimes have a bit of time in the afternoon. So I found this fantastic little second-hand bookshop in Edinburgh, and I picked up this Flashman, which is a novel. And people might remember the Tom Brown School Days, the bully.
So who's the author? I can't quite see it on the screen.
It is George MacDonald Fraser.
Right, yeah.
And this is the kind of conceit of the book is that it's about the bully Flashman from Tom Brown's School Days when he grows up and he becomes a soldier. And despite the fact that his kind of moral character has not changed from Tom Brown's School Days.
I don't know what you're referring to? Tom Brown's School Days.
Okay, so that's it's kind of almost a Dickensian novel. And the reason I remember it very well is that in the 1970s, there was a BBC adaptation of it on a series on children's television. And it was a great adaptation, but it was also terrifying because it's all about the kind of fag system in public schools and how young boys were really bullied and terrorised by the older boys in public schools.
Okay.
Rugby and those kind
And
of
this
places.
character in this novel was
Yeah.
one of the bullies
Correct.
in this other thing.
Correct.
Okay.
In Tom Brown's School Days. Yes. So Flashman joins the army, and I say his moral character hasn't changed. He's still a bully. He's still a coward. But he just happens to end up in situations where the public see him as a hero. So this first book, there's a whole series of these, is about the retreat from Kabul in the 1840s. So this is the first
retreat from Kabul.
The first retreat from Kabul, yeah. The first Anglo-Afghan war. And I won't spoil the kind of the narrative for you, but he isn't at all a hero, but he comes out of the war as a hero. And it's kind of one of those books where in the again, going back to BBC TV, you used to watch Doctor Who from behind the settee because you were horrified and terrified by it, but you couldn't not watch it. And this is, again, a book where it's horrifying and terrifying, but I can't put it down. So it's utterly un-PC. It's sprinkled with the N-word, and his attitude to women is, I think, what you would have called in those days.
By the way, sorry, when was it written?
So it was written in the 1960s.
So the 1960s,
1960s,
right?
Yeah. So he's writing it as a historical novel. His attitude to women, Flashman's attitude to women is, I think in those days you would have called him a philanderer. I think in these days he would be behind bars for the way he treats women.
And there is a scantily clad woman
There is.
wrapped around his legs
Correct.
on the front cover.
Yeah, as I said, there's nothing PC about this at all.
But you absolutely love it.
I loved it. I couldn't put it down. So I have now bought the second one in the series, and I've started reading that as well, which is equally awful, but compelling.
Compelling, yeah.
So I would recommend it, but only if you have the stomach for some of the things that I have already mentioned.
Very good.
Right.
So that was my book. Ben, you had a
Shall I
book as
introduce
well.
mine then?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm going to introduce, I can barely pick it up. It's so huge. But it's this tome here, it's The Power Broker by Robert A. Caro. And the Power Broker is a guy called Robert Moses. I'll put it down. And basically, you've no doubt never heard of Robert Moses.
No, I've not.
And that's one of the remarkable things, because this book is, as you can see, it's over 1,000 pages long. And it's about a guy you've never heard of, who's actually a technocrat. And yet again, like your book, I could barely put it down. I could barely pick it up because it's so heavy. But it's so well written. It's a wonderful biography, really lovely writing, but also it's so pertinent to so much that's going on today, and especially, like I said, Moses is almost the like kind of the like the first technocrat really of the 20th century. What he did.
So when are we? Situate us in time, if you would.
Yeah, no, apologies for sort of rambling rather than getting onto the facts of it. He sort of came onto the public scene in New York, which is like New York City and also New York State, so around the 1920s. And he came through the good government movement, actually, you could say the progressive movement in America, which was, in New York, attempting to reform the notoriously corrupt New York government system, Tammany Hall and all that. And he was quite an idealistic person to begin with. And he wrote a lot of reports. He studied the British civil service, saw it as an example, was a great hero for many people. But, eventually he got done by the system, the Tammany Hall system in New York, marginalized him. He couldn't get a job. And that really changed him. And the biography shows this, how he basically traded on his reputation as a trustworthy, good man for the rest of his life, while he was actually doing a new version of what they, the old corrupt system had done through technocracy, through basically being an unaccountable quango holder. And the biography, it shows how he basically ran New York. You had all these different mayors, but they all kowtowed to him. And he built up his power base through infrastructure, through building a lot of roads, bridges, tunnels, which he charged tolls for. And then that money went into his his authorities' coffers. And then he used that money to influence anyone of any standing in the city. So he ended up with basically untrammeled power to a large extent. Nothing could really happen in the city and even in the state without his saying it. And it's just remarkable how this can happen for someone that you've never heard of before. It's an absolute lesson in how power works. The whole book. And like I say, it's completely compelling. So well written, so well told. It's a proper story, but goes so deep. Caro, I think he spent at least 7 years researching and writing it. Maybe even longer. I'm not sure, but just a remarkable piece of work.
Sounds great.
Do you get the sense that this Robert Moses character achieved some good things in his life?
Well, it's one of these cases where, for him, he built all these roads, bridges to connect New York, which of course is islands. So you could say these things were much needed, and they're well used to this day. People rely on them. So in a sense, you could say yes, but in the process of doing that, he marginalised all the light rail schemes. The underground schemes, any railways. He stopped any of that from happening. So, the New York subway went into basically disrepair during the time he was around. And so he basically enforced on the city, and to an extent America, because the whole of America followed his example. He enforced reliance on the car. Really, it's the reason why America is such a car-based society now. It comes down to him eventually. And you could say, I assume he's been, in that sense, massively influential here too, on the way we live. Other aspects, of course, he ploughed expressways through communities. So his authorities just served up the people living in the Bronx with, a few weeks' notice that they were going to lose their house. Apparently, according to Caro, around 500,000 people lost their homes because of Moses in New York alone. So it's one of those things. It's it swings and roundabouts, really. But it's if you have the power to do it, whatever you say goes, and people have to adjust to it, and they live their lives on the schemes that you've put there. So very ambivalent.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like he has ticks in both the positive and the negative boxes there.
Yeah, no, completely.
Yeah.
But also earlier in his life, I mean, I don't want to talk too long, but earlier in his life, in his more positive period, he built a lot of playgrounds in New York. There were hardly any playgrounds. But then we go over to the negative again, is that he tended to build them in certain neighborhoods,
Right. Okay.
wealthier neighborhoods, whiter
Yeah.
neighborhoods. So the black Puerto Rican neighborhoods, they didn't get anything. So yeah,
Interesting
a
person that I've
real
never heard of
character.
before.
Yeah,
So might be worth looking up Robert Moses.
Yes,
and
we'll
that biography.
put it in the show notes.
We will, and we'll also put a link for people that are listening to be able to buy your book.
great, thanks.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you fancy buying a copy of Ben's book, click on the link. It's very easy to do.
Great. So thanks, Ben, for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me,
Yes.
and I hope I didn't waffle too much.
No, we like a good run at a book review. It's great. I one of the things I was thinking when I was on my way to work today was that it's really interesting how in the current climate that we live in, there are no kind of public intellectuals who have a real interest in politics. So it's great to have you as an SDP member, Ben. So
Oh, thanks.
I'm very,
It's-
very proud to have you.
Well, it's really good to be with you, and I'm rooting for you all the way.
Great. So thanks, Ben. Thanks for listening, everybody. Please do all the things that we urge you to do, like follow the show, rate and review. And we will see you later in the week for a news item.
Thanks for listening.
Bye now.